Well, thank you very much, and it's just great to see you all. I hope you had a good Christmas, and I think we're all hopeful for a blessed new year. How's that? Okay. Today I'll be speaking about a biblical scripture, and not because I'm an avid reader of the Bible or in any way capable of interpreting its mystical messages, but rather as a report on how one verse is having a positive impact on my life experience and the particulars of how you too may discover its benefits. The scripture is Phillipians chapter 4, verse 8, written by Paul when imprisoned in Rome to a struggling group of Christians in Philippi. The verse is as follows: "Finally, brethren, whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are honest, whatsoever things are just, whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things are lovely, whatsoever things are of good report, if there be any virtue, and if there be any praise, think on these things." This is from the King James Version. The backstory: a friend who never reads books was accidentally invited to join a women's group that would be discussing the book, The 4-8 Principle by Tommy Newberry, a New York Times bestseller. Being curious and an avid reader, I inquired about the book they were reading, and before I knew it, I too was included in the contacts for the book club that would be meeting via Zoom every couple of weeks. I ordered the book and quickly realized it was not my cup of tea. It was going to be too preachy, too Christian, and I, with my years of spiritual inquiry, was way beyond the concepts it would hold. On the other hand, I did want to encourage my friend who had already read the first chapter and liked it. I consented to participate. The night of the first meeting arrived and I was dreading it. Not being a huge fan of Zoom, the 6:30 p.m. time, discussing the topic with people I did not know, all of it. To top it off, my friend, who I had wanted to support reading anything beyond People magazine, would not be attending. She was in the hospital getting a pacemaker placed for an abnormally slow heart rate at the age of 51. More on that later. Once on Zoom, my attitude started to soften when I recognized two other women as co-workers from the past. The group was small, only 5 of us, and the conversation flowed. We discussed the first couple of chapters in the book, The 4-8 Principle, The Secret of a Joy-Filled Life. The author, Tommy Newberry, a personal coach for entrepreneurs, adheres to the principle that no part of our life is untouched by our thoughts. But many of us are not aware of our habitual thinking patterns, which either encourage us towards excellence or nudge us into weakness. He explores how our approximately 50,000 daily thoughts impact the quality of our present and future experiences. The book explores ways we can change our thought patterns to mirror those of God. Thinking like God thinks. We cannot literally know how God thinks, but from thousands of years of collected writings from world religions, spiritual masters, and hopefully our own personal experiences, we can infer certain God thought attributes. This list might include God is love, God is truth, God is just, God is merciful, and ever present, to name a few. These are descriptions of God's nature and give us a place to notice our own thoughts. And if found lacking in these attributes, to explore ways to improve our thinking and attempt to embody new habits of God thought. The Apostle Paul presents us with exceedingly wise advice for thinking like God thinks when he challenges us to seek out and dwell on the positives in our life. In his letter to the followers of Philippi, Paul could have been justified by being negative, unfairly accused, confined in prison, and facing death. He chose to emphasize possibilities instead of problems. In his letters, he challenged believers to think differently and rise above the world's standard. He did not dwell on the unfairness he was experiencing, the poor conditions, or the unkind treatment of the guards, his bad luck, or what he missed about being free. His letters reflect a spirit of gratitude, all amid continued persecution. Philippians 4:8 reflects very crisply the nature and character of God, which is true, noble, just, pure, lovely, and of good report. As followers of the teachings of Jesus the Christ, we are called to meditate on things that mirror these characteristics, thereby allowing our lives to be filled with hope and optimism, and with practice, living a more joy-filled existence. Many of us have heard sermons, read books, and attended workshops reflecting the same message of the 4:8 book. Here are some of the techniques to circumvent our natural tendencies of thought that may not be serving us well. The first step, notice your thoughts. Pay attention to any conversation for about 10 minutes, and you may begin to see patterns of negative self-talk, whining, blaming, justifying, and condemning. Many people are fond of making to-do lists. Paul in Philippians is encouraging to think list. As described in the Amplified Bible, if there is any virtue and excellence, if there is anything worthy of praise, think on and weigh and take account of these things. Rather, fix your mind on them. Paul is reminding us that we have a choice, and with God's help, we can control our thoughts. Now, some of you are thinking that this can be a bit of a Pollyanna outlook. Granted, in life, there are always peaks and valleys. It is a mixed bag for sure. You may have a great marriage, but your kids are struggling, or your health is not good, or you are financially challenged. This is life, a mixture of good and bad. Whether you choose to count your blessings or choose to complain, it is helpful to understand that we all have a choice. One of the leading principles at work here is the law of attraction. When you focus on the good, you notice better and create better. So what are some of the techniques one should practice to change our way of thinking? The law of reversibility. One of the most effective and least utilized methods for upgrading your emotional life is acting your way into feelings you most desire. If you're not experiencing as much joy, passion, or satisfaction in life as you would like, you can, over time, act your way into those higher emotions by behaving and thinking in ways consistent with your emotional goal. Most people resist this option because they have been conditioned to believe that positive emotions should happen naturally. Acting happy when you're sad is being phony or lying to oneself. To those who feel as if they are lying when they act better than they feel, there is a far greater likelihood that their negative emotions, not their positive ones, are rooted in untruth. An example of this would be getting up in the morning and still feeling tired and utterly unmotivated to face the day. Then a friend calls and wants to meet for lunch, and suddenly you're perked up and enthused without even having that first cup of coffee. Or when you know you should take that walk and get some exercise, but you don't feel up to it. However, you put on your walking shoes anyway and decide to walk out and get the mail or bring in the trash bin from the end of the driveway. Once underway, you feel pretty good and decide to extend your walk to the usual route. And before you know it, you've gotten your steps in, noticed the beautiful puffy clouds, the wind on your cheeks, etc. This is the law of reversibility. Forcing ourselves to act in a manner consistent with what we value, not in the manner consistent with how we are feeling. Starving negative emotions. When you deal with negativity, you have a couple of options. You can either suppress them by burying them deep inside, making yourself sick, or you can express your negativity to those closest to you and make them sick in the short term. Most people think these are the only two options. However, spiritual masters, counselors, and ministers, to name a few, have demonstrated, counseled, and preached to some effective tools we can use to combat negative emotions in our lives. Here are a few. 1, you can acknowledge your negative emotions. It is helpful to think of a negative emotion as a warning light in your car's dashboard. If you ignore the light, you may well be inviting a bigger problem down the road. Once you acknowledge the light, you can take it to the mechanic and find out if it is a true problem or a false alarm. Any necessary maintenance can be done and the light will be eliminated. Negative emotions can be dealt with in the same way, by acknowledging them, exploring the cause, and determining if there is a real problem that needs to be addressed or merely a false alarm. For myself, these negative emotions take time to analyze. I find that once noticed, I do not have to act on feelings that are being evoked, but can take a watch and wait approach. Usually what I am experiencing is more about me. For instance, not getting enough sleep or living in my head and its endless dialogue. Given time, more is usually revealed, and I have either the answer of what is brewing and needs to be addressed, or the emotion has dissolved, and I have not incurred damage to a relationship or a moment in time. 2, you can put emotions in their place. When you become aware of a negative emotion, simply remind yourself, this is just the way I feel. It's not necessarily the truth. Therefore, it doesn't have to dictate my behavior. Feelings are not the gospel and are rarely cited in spiritual writings as a basis for acting. Left unchecked, our feelings can lead us to act and or speak in a manner that is not conducive to harmonious living. 3, you can own negative emotions. Declare, I am responsible. The good news is you do not even have to believe this completely. It's like apologizing when you truly don't feel sorry, but you want to move on. Affirming, I am responsible, even if you must grit your teeth to do it, deflates negative emotions via the law of exchange. You can do away with a negative thought only by replacing it with a positive thought. The three words, I am responsible, pierce the illusion of blame and withhold the emotional oxygen it needs to survive. Accepting responsibility means you're responding maturely in a way that keeps you more effective and creative. In this productive mindset, you can see situations and solutions much more clearly. Beware, this is so simple that many people refuse to even try it. Even if you cannot stomach accepting any responsibility for the situation you find yourself in, you are still responsible for what you do about it. You are responsible for your reaction and whether it improves or worsens your circumstances. The moment you stop blaming others, you are on the road to greater emotional health. When something goes wrong in your world, resist the temptation to extend that pointer finger in any other direction than back to yourself. Whenever you catch yourself going down the path of blame, activate the law of exchange and say to yourself, I am responsible. The first few times you say it, it may not feel true. Stick with it and repeat it because you know it is a spiritual truth. Relax. You are not accepting legal liability for negative situations. You are not proclaiming that another person did not contribute to the problem. What you are doing is refusing to be brought down to a lower level because of what someone else does. Do not let another person determine your frame of mind. Life is too short. 4, you can starve negative emotions by tuning into the big picture. Step back and remind yourself of what is profoundly important. A change in perspective can quickly create a change in heart. If you came to me with a problem you were struggling with, as a friend, I may ask you these questions. What is the goal here? What outcome do you want in this situation? Will the negative state you're experiencing move you in that direction, or will it move you in another direction? Then I would encourage you to ask yourself the following. Where is this situation headed, and is that okay? What do I intend to create? What's important here? When you give up the need to be right, you expand your options and experience joy instead of distress. Only after finally seeing the big picture can you fully grasp that the negative situation you saw before was only a small part of the whole. 5, you can drop the thought. You can simply refuse to indulge the negative thoughts. You can refuse to rehash them, replay them, or otherwise worship them. Warn yourself that when you neglect to drop the negative thought, you're choosing to drink the poison. We all have the capacity to change our thought patterns. How many times have we been to the movies and started thinking about something we needed to do the next day when we caught ourselves and thought, this is not the time for that, and returned our focus to the movie? Or when we were at dinner with a loved one and started thinking about work until we realized we were not focusing on the present moment and returned our attention to our partner. When thoughts are emotionally charged, it is oftentimes much more difficult to distract oneself. In this case, we can recite a mantra such as peace be still, or God and I are one, or the one that Reverend Eileen uses, God is, and I am. This can be done either silently or loud. Focusing on the breath or taking a brisk walk while using the positive prayer or invocation, calling a friend, and avoiding telling your side of the emotionally charged event, or a calming bath or shower may also be used to break the habit of negative spiraling. In conclusion, over the past couple of months, I have been practicing the techniques I have described here today. Do I continue to resort to old patterns of thinking? Of course I do. But I've also noticed shifts in how I am feeling about things in my life. Since the initial meeting of the 4-8 group, I have continued to read the book and participate in the bi-monthly discussions. I have created a list of my values and a personal mission statement for how I want to be in this life. Despite being initially put off by the groups being obviously overtly Christian and the judgment I have when people constantly refer to God as He, this, and He, that, I have committed to the practice of working the suggested tools to change what my mind dwells on and attempt to practice the principle of 4-8. I now can see these tools are helping me in my spiritual journey and my day-to-day relationship with others and myself. Also, the realization of how I accidentally fell into this group was sharply tested the day after our first meeting. My dear friend, who had had the pacemaker placed and couldn't make the first session, suffered a major stroke and had lost the use of her left side, was life-flighted to Sacramento for an emergency removal of the offending clot from her brain. Having been introduced to a new spiritual community with which I could rapidly connect via our text group, allowed me to reach out to them and request immediate prayer for my friend. Since that time, I have witnessed the power of prayer and connection. My friend rapidly regained use of her left side and has suffered minimal effects of the stroke that originally were so significant. She and her husband have shared Thanksgiving and Christmas dinners with us, and she returned to work this past week to her job as a department director at the hospital. Her attitude has shown the principles of dwelling on what is positive, beautiful, and good report, and this is manifesting in her physical well-being. Now, rather than thinking I was participating in the group for her, I suspect it was I who needed the lessons contained in Paul's letter to the followers of Philippians. Finally, brethren, whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are honest, whatsoever things are just, whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things are lovely, whatsoever things are of good report, if there is any virtue, and if there be any praise, think on these things. Happy New Year.